In this part, we are going to continue with the resource dictionary. It means that we are going to define the resources that we use in our projects. Again, we will use the enterprise menu to select the resources, or you can use the directory bar at the left side to open resources tab. As I told you before, some screens of the P6 are directly opened with some filters. In resources screen, we have a filter at the beginning as well. You see that it only displays current projects resources for now. The first thing that you need to do is remove this filter by selecting the all resources from filter by option. Now you can see the list of all resources currently defined in your database. Of course, this list is coming from the example projects. Before showing you how to create new resources, I want to explain you the options in details window. The first tab is General tab. There's a basic information here related to selected resources. So for example, when I select concrete finisher, you can see the information related to concrete finisher here. You can see the ID and name of the resources. If there's an employee ID in the company, you can write it here. If you want, you can write a special title for your resources. You can also add details like email address and phone numbers. There's also a small checkbox here. It shows whether a resource is active or not. If you deactivate the resource, you cannot assign it to the new projects. But information of this resource in the previous projects will not be affected. When you delete a resource, it will be also deleted from all of the previous projects. So if you don't want to use a specific resource in your database anymore, I recommend you to deactivate it instead of deleting. By this way, you can protect the resource utilization information in the previous projects. Second tab is codes. In P6, you can define some codes and assign them to your resources or activities. We will talk about the codes later. Here you can see the codes assigned to this resource. We understand that this resource is related to construction works, and this is working on plant A in North America. So these are the examples in the database. For example, when you define material resources, you can arrange a coding structure so that you can assign some supplier's name to your material as a code. Coding is especially useful for filters because you have several resources in your database. For example, if you just want to see resources from plant A, you can arrange such a filter. We will talk about these issues later while we are discussing the filters. The next tab is details. Here, the most important part for you is the resource type. In P6, you can define 3 different types of resources, which are labor, non-labor, and material. Labor refers to workers, non-labor stands for machinery and equipment, and materials are resources like concrete, structural steel, and brick in construction works. As you can see here, we also have unit of measure for materials. You don't need this for labor and non-labor because you can measure the amount of these resources only with time. If you assign a concrete worker to a concrete activity with 3 days and 10 hours per day working time, it means that you use this resource for 30 hours. But for materials, you cannot measure them with hours. For example, you can measure the amount of concrete with meter cube or for steel, you can use kilogram or tons. Therefore, if your resource type is material, then you have to select the unit of measure according to type of your material. Remember that in the calendars part, I told you you can also assign calendars to your resources. If you want to do this, you can select the calendar here. There are some default options here. Please do not change these options. I will not explain them because there are too much details here, but for example, if you uncheck this box, P6 will not calculate the cost from the unit price of this resource. Also, there are some options here related to currencies and overtime issues. Let me make this one bigger. You can see some issues related to currencies and overtime here. We usually do not use these options in P6, but for example, if you want to see your cost in a different currency, you can use this option. There is no Turkish lira here. If you want to add Turkish lira to your database, select admin and currencies. Here you can add the Turkish lira. So for ID, you can write TL, and for currency name, you can write Turkish lira. If you want, you can also add the currency symbol and exchange rate for TL. Let me close this one. And when I click the same place again, now you see that we have Turkish lira here. So if you want, you can assign the Turkish lira for the currency of this resource. However, in your turn project, your cost items will be given in dollars, so you don't need to change this part. Let's continue with the next tab, which is units and prices. And actually, you will only use this standard rate part to assign unit prices to your resources. Maximum unit over time shows the maximum number available for this resource. For example, 8 per day means you have 8 hours per day for this resource. We also know that 1 day equals to 8 hours. It means that we only have one concrete finisher here. If I write here 16, it means that we have 2 concrete finishers in this case. So you can determine the maximum available number for this resource. However, this part is only important if you use resource leveling options in Primavera. In this tutorial, we will not cover the resource leveling as it is not used in practice too often. Therefore, you don't need to change anything for this part in your turn project. There are also some details here. If you want to use more than one shift for this resource, you can use these options, but it is too much detail, so I will not explain this part. We are not using these shifts in practice. Also, if you expect a change in the unit price after a specific date, you can use this add button. For example, when I select, let's say, 1st of January 2021. So, and when I write here, let's say 65, it means that when I assign this resource to an activity which will be held after 1st of January 2021, it will use this unit price. For the activities before this date, it will use this unit price. But I think this is also too much detail because Primavera is not a cost management software, it is a time management software. Uh, Although you have such kind of cost options in P6, I can say that in practice, cost management is usually held with some additional computer tools. So in practice, we are not using this option too often. In the next tab, you can assign some roles to your resources. For example, we have trades role assigned to this resource. You can also select the proficiency level for this role. It shows how good your concrete finisher in trading. But again, this is something that we do not use too much in practice. The next tab is notes. Here, using the modify button, you can write some additional details for your resources if you want. Finally, in P6, it is also possible to create your own data fields to add some additional information. So you can do this for resources, but I think you don't need to create a user-defined field at this level. And now we are ready to create the resources given in the exercise 4. We have 3 resources for 3 different types. They are concrete worker as a labor resource, crane as a non-labor resource, and formwork as a material resource. For each resource, unit price information is given, and for the formwork, unit of measure is also given as meter square. Now let's add them one by one. In order to add a new resource, we can use the command bar. When you click add here, you can see a new resource wizard. You'll see such kind of wizards too much in P6. They help you to add a new information to Primavera. And for the new users, it is a good option, I think. Here, first of all, it wants you to write the ID and name of the resource. For concrete worker, I will write CW for the ID. Remember that you have limited numbers of characters for the IDs. And I write the name here, concrete worker. Select next. Here you should select resource type. Concrete worker is a labor resource. So I can select labor and continue with the next. You should write the hourly unit price of concrete worker here, which is $8 according to the exercise. So just write here 8. Do not change these options because we don't need them. Select next. We don't need any details for office phone or email address, so select next. If you want, you can assign a role here, but we don't need a role. Select next. Here you can assign an existing calendar or you can create a new calendar for your resources. Select next with the first option. Here we can assign our project calendar, which is class exercise. But actually, it is not very important because in order to use the resource calendars, you need some additional options, as I mentioned previously. Since I do not teach these options, your selection here will not affect anything. But if you want, you can select your project calendar just in case. So I will continue to next. And do not change this part. It is related to updating your schedule. But in the turn project, you will not do anything about updating. So just click next one more time. And it says, congratulations. When you select finish, your first resource will be ready. You can also arrange the hierarchy between the resources using these arrows at the command bar. So let me put the concrete worker at top of the list. Okay. As you can see, new resource wizard help you to add resources, but it asks too much question. Alternatively, you can right click here and you can select the add option, or you can push the insert button in your keyboard. And when you do this, you see that this time it added a resource without a wizard. Now you can define the necessary information from the details window. So in general tab, we can write the ID and name, which are CR and Crane for the second resource in the exercise. And we can continue with the details. This is a non-labor resource, so I'm going to select non-labor. And the calendar is already selected as the class exercise because this resource is created as connected to concrete worker. Since the calendar of concrete worker is the class exercise, we have the same calendar here. And for the unit price, we will write 100 to standard rate. It is $100 per hour. Now we defined all information given in the class exercise. You see that it takes less amount of time as compared to the wizard. I also want to have these resources at the same level. For this purpose, select move left here. Finally, I have a material resource, which is formwork. Let me also define it. This time I push insert button in my keyboard. So you see that it added a new resource here. Let me write the ID and name in the columns this time. So for formwork, my ID is FW and the name is formwork. You can also select the resource type here. So I'm going to select material. It asks, are you sure? Say yes. Let me also change the hierarchy for this one. So as you can see, for the labor resources, there's a small man here. For the non-labor resources, there's a gear here. And for the material resources, there's a brick here. You can also identify the types of resources with these items. I told you that you need to select unit of measure for materials. When we look at the details tab, here we can assign a unit of measure for the formwork. But as you can see, there is no meter square here. Now I will show you how to add a new unit of measure in Primavera. From admin, select admin categories. And at the bottom part, select units of measure. Now you can add some new items here. Select add and write M2 for unit abbreviation and meter square for the unit name. Click close button Now, when you look at the unit of measure, you can see the meter square here. So I can assign meter square for my formwork resource. By the way, you can also change the unit of measure using the columns. As you can see, you can also change it with this window. But when I click here, it is not possible to select the unit of measure because labor and non-labor resources can only be measured with hours, as I mentioned before. Let me also add the unit price of the formwork, select units and prices, and write 15 according to our exercise. So it is $15. Sorry, this is concrete worker for formwork. Right here, 15, and it is $15 per meter square. For concrete, we have 8, for crane, we have 100, and for formwork, we have $15. Finally, if you want to connect these three resources to a single item so that you can easily find them later, you can add a fake resource. Let me also do that. So let's say ID is RL and name is resource list. So let me make the necessary arrangements. Okay. So please note that this is not a real resource. We just use it to connect all of our resources to a single item, as you can see here. Okay, now we learned how to define new items in this resources tab. By the way, I didn't say it in the first part, but if you want, you can close the tabs in P6 using this cross button. So it closed the resources tab, and I also closed the projects tab. So you see that we don't have anything on the screen now. And it is the end of this part. Thank you for your attention. In the next part, we will continue with creating a new project.